Hi, everyone. I'm Dee, as Keenan had mentioned before, and I'll just be like a panel discussant for the lived experience panel. I'll start by introducing our panel to you. First, we have Alia Ismail. She, or they, is a 28-year-old Arab American queer person living in Detroit, Michigan. She has a passion for helping people feel comfortable in their bodies and is able to use professional experiences to guide others through social media and in her barber career. Second, we have Dominic Lauren. He, or they, is a transforming media representation of transgender people through his successful work as a SAG-AFTRA performing artist, actor, dancer, performer on Netflix, Hulu, HBO Max, Amazon Prime Video, and Apple TV. Dominic has worked with artists like Tegan and Sara. Dominic is featured in Rolling Stone, Teen Vogue, Vice, The Atlantic, BuzzFeed, The Advocate, HuffPost, Radio Canada, Daily Mail, and Them. Dominic is an award-winning speaker and advocate for the LGBTQ+ community. Dominic speaks to the trials and tribulations he faced when he came out as transgender at 14 years old in 2010. Dominic shares about coming out in a religious all-girls high school environment, experiencing being abandoned, struggling with and overcoming mental illness, and finding chosen family, compassion, forgiveness, and how to thrive. Dominic is a consultant on the LGBTQ+ inclusion and has worked with major organizations like the Trevor Project, GLAAD, GSA Network, ACLU, Transgender Law Center, National Center for Transgender Equality, PFLAG, GLSEN, and the Los Angeles LGBT Center, and has spoken at universities such as UCLA. Okay, and third, we have W. Ariel Gould, they or she, is a second-year PhD student in the Social and Behavioral Health Sciences Division of the Dalla Lana School of Public Health at University of Toronto. Their research interests include 2S LGBTQ+ health, especially transgender mental health, and 2S LGBTQ+ employment, frequently incorporating a queer theory perspective. They served mental health consumers in San Francisco, California, and Philadelphia. As a clinical social worker between 2012 and 2021 in supportive housing, county jail, and outpatient clinic settings. They also have advocated for transgender equality since 2006. So that is our panel. Now I'm going to give them the floor to speak.
Hi, is this working? You can hear me, cool. Thank you, Dee, for that. I'm very grateful to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I really feel like my bio was not that big compared to everyone else, but I promise you I do a lot of things. I just didn't know I needed to list it. Okay, so yeah, like Kenan was saying, we met through TikTok. I chose that platform because I think it was just the most popular at that time. A little bit about me, I have always been a very fluid person in my gender and sexuality from a young age. I was what you would call a tomboy when I was a kid, and I didn't really think much about my gender. I thought it was normal to have a crush on a boy and a girl in first grade, so all of that was fine. It wasn't until I hit puberty when I felt really uncomfortable. I was someone that went through sexual abuse at a young age by a family member and had feeling of uncomfortability in my body because of that. And I think that that also transpired into me transitioning. But I will say that I viewed myself as a masculine being from a young age. So when I decided to come out as bisexual and then gay and lesbian and then trans, I was really just trying to find a label that fit for me. I transitioned 10 years ago in 2015 medically. I came out as trans in 2012. So back then, the only resource that I had was Tumblr, and I can kind of find some people that maybe resonated just a tiny bit. I decided to create a documentary that followed my first year in my transition, which is now free. It's called A Year in Transition on Vimeo, to create a resource for other trans people, just to kind of see what I was going through. All I could find was YouTube videos of how my voice was going to sound, what my surgery looked like. I think it was always about how we physically looked, and I couldn't find anything that was about the emotional feelings with transitioning. So I tried my best to showcase that and advocate for those people. In my bio, I am Arab American, so there was also not much representation for that. Within my culture, the only queer representation I had, I didn't have it, really. The relationships that I saw were between a man and a woman. And so for me, I felt because I had an attraction to women, well, then I must be a man with my masculinity. So from there, I did the Google searches. I was trying to find more about that. When I went to college, that's when I found more trans people and what it looked like to transition in real life. And it took me about 3 years, so in 2015, when I decided to medically transition. I feel that I was very fortunate with my doctors and my therapists. I was in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where the University of Michigan is. So trans healthcare was kind of at the forefront in that time. The first therapist that I saw on day one, when I expressed my feelings, they had said that, I know you are trans, and if I could write you the letter today, I would. I did not go back to that healthcare professional. I felt uncomfortable because I don't even know who I am at this point, so how did you? It wasn't until about 6 or 8 months later, after seeing another therapist, I went back to them because at that point I was sure that I wanted to go on hormones. And I didn't see that other therapist before, but when I went back to them, because it had been the 6 months, they were able to write me that letter that week. So I left that appointment with that. I was paired with an amazing doctor who is still my doctor today. She has guided me through hormones, through surgery, and with my detransition. So I felt comfortable enough to go back to that doctor. And like I said, I've had great experience with that. As far as coming to detransition, like I said, no representation again. And I felt that because I shared my story of transitioning, I had to finish that story. I didn't want anyone to think that I had regret or shame or guilt for what I had chose for my life. And it took a lot of acceptance for that. I was very happy with my transition. It fulfilled me in many ways that I was not able to be fulfilled in my masculinity. I learned a lot about myself and who I am. And I realized that others' perceptions of who I am in this world didn't matter anymore. And I think that that happened with age as well. I think once I hit the 25 mark, that's when things started to shift in my mind. So then I went on TikTok and I started just sharing what I was going through and spoke on YouTube and really went in depth in a little bit of a different form. And I found that that helped people, and so I continued to do that. As you could see from my videos, I was a very binary masculine person. And I did not think I was going to look like this today because there was nothing out there that would show me that. So I hope that, you know, the way that I can show that physicality and the emotions in that translates well to others. Right now, I don't really care for labels. I definitely resonate with trans men still. I resonate with cis women. I sometimes resonate with trans women as well and non-binary folks. I mean, I've identified as everything under the rainbow, so I'm really well versed. But yeah, I feel like I've taken the pressure off myself, and I can just live and be who I am for the first time in my life. And I'm able to finally dress and be that person without anyone telling me that I can't. So hopefully my story resonates with a lot of you that's not just transition, and you can feel that you can be who you are.
Hello. Hi, everyone. I just wanted to say thank you for the invitation to come speak at this symposium. It's kind of a full circle moment for me. As Kinnan mentioned, I met Kinnan on TikTok, and it was at the latter end of my detransition. I had deleted my social media, but wanted to get back into talking to individuals about my transition and detransition, and now I retransitioned, and I'll get to that. But I actually blocked Kinnan at one point on TikTok, which I'm sure you remember, because of the isolation I was feeling, but also the attention that I was getting while I was detransitioning of people wanting to talk to me. And this was not saying that Kinnan was coming to talk to me as if I was just a statistic, but that's how I was feeling at the time, because a lot of individuals hadn't heard of a detransition, nor had they really seen someone who still was very mask presenting claim a detransition at the time. It was around, I want to say mid 2019 when I started detransitioning, and for me that encompassed just cessation of testosterone and allowing myself to not claim a label. I found that labels had really boxed me in, but were also a safe space for me. I came out as trans at a very young age. I found the terminology when I was 14 years old on Tumblr, and I resonated with it instantly. Prior to that, I chose the name Dominic at 7 years old, and I was a tomboy from as young as I can remember, and I very much aligned with being a masculine child. I did not have familial support during my childhood to present masculine, to even cut my hair. When I asked to go by Dominic, even before I knew what transgender was, I was not allowed to do that. So I felt a lot of isolation in that experience. And then at my Catholic all-girls school, it was a very small school, so I stuck out, obviously. I looked like this, minus the beard. My voice was a little bit higher, and I looked a little bit younger. And I found that was an isolating experience as well, because I had a family member of mine working on the campus who was not supportive of me and actively tried to get other people to not feed my delusion, as trans people are often told. So this was very harmful to me as a young person. I found that it stunted my perception of self, because it didn't allow for me to take on any sort of identity that was outside of being very traditionally masculine, because if I did sway from that, people wouldn't take me seriously. So I found that that put me in this box, and I found a way to make that box work for me and be this very masculine individual, so people would take my transness seriously. And I transitioned socially in 2010 when I was 14 years old, and I was seeking personally to have access to hormone replacement therapy at that time. However, because I was not granted familial support, I had to wait until 18 years old. So by the time I got to 18, it was almost as if I wanted to start doing everything in my transition that I hadn't been able to do for the past 4 years. I wanted to get top surgery as fast as possible. I wanted to start hormones as fast as possible, and I wasn't gonna let anyone stop me. I ended up being forced to leave the house that I grew up in when I was 18 years old, because the individuals who raised me did not believe that I was transgender, nor did they support me medically transitioning. So I found myself living at my friend's grandma's house for two to 3 days and trying to figure out where to go after that. And I remember during that time feeling even more isolation than I had already prior felt. And so once I got access to testosterone, I felt really happy. I didn't have any complaints. It was working for me. Everything that I wanted to happen was happening. And I also ended up having top surgery, and that as well was really an amazing experience for me. However, as I started to get further along in my transition, I would say about 5 years in, which I thought was very interesting because it was in alignment with a lot of the data that was shown earlier today, I started to feel this incongruence with my gender identity and how I was seeing myself and how I was appearing in the world to other people. Having been at this all-girls school allowed for me to have this inherent femininity but also be affirmed in my masculinity. There was this gender fluidity that was okay amongst me and my peers, and it was a very small school. There was only 30 people in my class, so we were very close-knit, and I got to know everyone on an individual level, so they were able to understand my transness and who I was as a person. When I was outside of that environment and then later went to college, I found it really hard to express my femininity and my masculinity at the same time. And I felt that I had totally lost connection with my feminine self. And that was what initially sparked me seeking to detransition, along with other mental health crises that I was struggling with because of having lack of support during my transition. I was often told to growing up that seeking out a medical transition was going to harm me physically. I was told a lot of very discriminatory things. I was also told a lot of things that were not true about medically transitioning, and a lot of these voices were internalized, and so every time that I would do my testosterone shot, for instance, I was hearing these voices in my head, and I was battling with this want to be transitioning, this want to be on testosterone, but also feeling that I was harming myself. And so I needed to take a step back from transitioning because I realized that I had no supportive environment for me to have ever explored my sense of self in regards to my expression and how I wanted to be perceived in the world and how I wanted other people to see me. So I decided to delete all of my social media and detransition. And during that time, I spent a lot of time outside in nature by myself, journaling a lot and just trying to get to the core of who I was and how I came to be as I am now. And during that time, what I really realized was a lot of the trauma that I experienced as a child was still affecting me as a young adult, and I needed to heal that first. I needed to come to what I call my base state, which was not on any of my psychiatric medications. Yes, I was with a doctor when I was titrating off of all of my medications, as well as my hormones, because I felt that for me to truly be okay with being on testosterone, I had to be off of testosterone first to create a better relationship with it. And during that time, I was allowing myself to feel how I felt when I first was seeking testosterone. Because I was no longer on it, my body began to change, and I was able to maintain some of the changes. However, a lot of the changes, specifically fat redistribution, changed for me. And I was faced with a lot of my dysphoria that I hadn't been faced with in 5 years. And that process, though it was rewarding at times and really detrimental at times, was so important for my growth because it's now allowed for me to retransition in a way that I feel is less of a toxic masculine perspective and more as this aligned and embodied human being encompassing my masculinity and femininity in equal parts, and feeling comfortable to say, yes, I want to continue with testosterone, and no longer have this voice in my head telling me that it's harming me. And that has granted me so much freedom to just show up as I am and not have to be put into boxes and labels, and just be Dominic and share my story. And for those who resonate with it, great. And for those who don't, that's fine as well. And that's brought me a lot of peace and comfort. But what I realized is affirmation is so important. It's important to really hear people where they say they're coming from and believe them and not question them on that, and understand that we are all each individual human beings. We have our own lived experiences. We come from different places from all over the world, different cultures. We speak different languages, and that's all going to influence our perception of self and how we interact with other people and how we then show up in different environments. And once I was able to solidify that for myself, I then was able to forgive my family for them not understanding where I was coming from when I was identifying as transgender. And that all into itself as well gave me a lot of power and freedom to not feel that I was holding this anger towards people for what I felt was denying me access to who I really was at such a young age, when I was so vocal about it and using words to articulate myself as a minor. And once I was able to come to that place, I really found myself wanting to continue to help other people who felt similar to me, because I know how alone and just isolated I felt. And when I was making my TikTok, that was my goal. However, I was really shocked to be met with a lot of people giving me backlash, and I found that to be really, really unfortunate because I was really in this in-between space where a lot of detrans people didn't think that I had detransitioned enough because I wasn't wanting to shave my facial hair, or get laser hair removal, or grow my hair out, or dress femininely. I just simply stopped testosterone, and I just simply stopped identifying as a trans man for a period of time. I just was labelless and genderless, if you'll call it that. And then on the flip side, I found a lot of trans people telling me I wasn't trans enough, and some trans people even telling me that I was cisgender, which was hard for me to understand where that was coming from. But I think at the end of the day, what I realized was that my experience can really trigger other people who may not be as secure in their own experience, and to not take that as my own responsibility, and to understand that, like, by me just unapologetically sharing this, these people can then learn whether or not they agree with me or not. And I am happy to be sharing this experience with you all here today, and I really appreciate you listening to what I have to say. So thank you.
Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, cool. So I did not meet Kenan on TikTok. And the big reason for that is because when it comes to telling my own story, I am actually deeply afraid, and have been for a number of years. And a lot of that fear is really because of the way I think detransition is stigmatized. Because of concerns about ways our stories can be really subverted or weaponized or used by other people. I personally have not shared much about my personal narrative, and I think that is also why I am humbled to be on a panel with people who have showed such courage in actually sharing their story over time, and especially on social media. Around 2006, I began identifying as non-binary. The words I used for it were agender, androgyne, since that is what they had on Susan's Playground at the time, popular to us LGBTQ plus support website. At the time, I was kind of networked into various support groups and activist groups with trans people on campus. I was in college at the time. And many of these people were considering like hormone surgery, other ways of changing their bodies. And so I naturally also wondered, what are some ways I could change mine? And I went through a number of iterations about what that could look like, including, ironically, shaving my head. At the time, I had about 2 feet of strawberry blonde hair. It was the time. And what I found myself struggling with was just trying to imagine any way of living in the world as presenting as non-binary, and finding some modicum of having a job. So I decided that the cultural milieu that I broadly lived in was one in which being a woman was at least legible. And I decided it was a direction I needed to go in to see if this is something that could feel comfortable. I think a question I was asking myself at the time was how much how comfortable would I feel with myself if I led a life in which I never tried this or never tried to find like more happiness or comfort in my body, and a life in which, in fact, I never saw if this is something that could actually make me happier. And I decided that, in fact, that was not the life I wanted to pursue. So I started on hormones and ended up living broadly as female of center for 4 years. In most social circles, I was accepted as female, and I would usually have to come out as trans. And I ended up having a moment about 3 years later in which I was in a classroom, this time in grad school, with fellow students and a professor who were all women. And I recognized all of the ways that my colleagues were genuinely affirming and validating me as someone female identified. And it felt so uncomfortable. I realized that something that I thought could be like managed or swept under the rug, like my internally felt sense of self, actually couldn't be. And that I had to find ways to recognize non-binary ness, identity, self in my life. So it was later that year that I went off of estrogen. And it was a few years later that I had top surgery. And the way I navigated that in my social life was inelegantly. Usually I would just make the decision I needed to for myself, and it's like, I'm not going to explain, it's fine. So I think I left a lot of people very confused. But what was interesting was really looking back at things really in retrospect. How had I felt when I first started on hormones, on estrogen and spironolactone? And I realized, I don't think I ever really liked that. I kind of had a wait and see approach of, well, let's just see what happens if there are more changes, and maybe you'll really like the ways you're embodied. And what I found years down the road is, no, that didn't happen. And as soon as I went off of hormones, inexplicably, this felt great. And then also when I had top surgery, similarly, wow, this felt great. So all of these moments that I think are part and parcel of kind of a traditional trans narrative of like loving the hormones, this just feeling great in some inexplicable way, of pursuing other body changes and immediately feeling like, wow, this is wonderful. I experienced this as I was actually reversing transition-related decisions I'd made previously. What that ultimately led me to was the sense that how you feel actually is rather important. That it's important to actually take stock of how you feel in your body, and also in terms of your emotions and your thoughts and feelings, because those are all going to be telling you something really important. And if, in fact, your body is telling you that you're feeling a sense of ambivalence, or that something isn't feeling good, like, that's actually okay. It's important to recognize that. And I think the things that kind of kept me from recognizing that were, at the time, my own need to just kind of explore and see what could make me happier. Which is why I have no regrets, because that was time I needed to be able to explore ways I could be. And I think good advice for just about anyone is that if you really pay close attention to how you're feeling, I think you'll probably find yourself on a path that is much more satisfying. A lot of how I'd been thinking about transition even early on was, how are other people going to perceive me, and what are ways I can fit into the world? And I would have been considerably better served if I'd had the attitude of, how is the world going to fit around me? Because my feelings are real. So, to come a bit full circle, I think, when it comes to even the word detransition, I'm one of those people who struggles even to say it, actually, because it's so loaded and so deeply stigmatized. Even though there's so many parts of my story that literally meet the definition. And I think that so much of that stigma, it translates into a culture of silence. It translates into isolation and alienation. Something that I've been thinking about today is how many online spaces are disproportionately assigned female at birth, or AFAB. And it seems like probably a big part of that is that people who are assigned male at birth are very likely struggling with the same stigma that I am, even just using the word. And what that translates into is not having the support and definitely feeling that alienation. So, again, that is why I'm so humbled to be on this panel with people who have, I think, cultivated resources by doing the really challenging work and the vulnerable work of putting yourself out there in a very public way and to connect. So, that's me.
Hello, it's me again. Yeah, I just would like to thank our panel for their lovely words and sharing their lived experience with us and showing us that on the other side of all of the research and the numbers, that there are human beings. There are folks with feelings and experiences. And I'd like to thank them for being so brave and sharing with us their life. Can we just have a round of applause again for them?